China is famous for 4 ancient inventions. Perhaps the most significant of them is paper. The man who invented paper, Cai Lun, is counted among the most influential people of all time. But what did the Chinese write on before Cai Lun's great invention? And where did he get his inspiration? Please stay tuned for the first part of a brand new series, The Story of Paper.
Wang Yan is a sculptor whose favorite subjects are mysterious beasts and strangely formed humans. He draws his inspiration from ancient Chinese art. One spring afternoon, he was working in a studio in Beijing's Heqiao Art District. His subject this time was Cai Lun, the man who invented paper. Cai Lun lived nearly 2,000 years ago. That was at the time of the Eastern Han Dynasty. No one knows what Cai Lun looks like. However, one thing is certain. As a eunuch, he did not have a beard. Anyway, Wang Yan decided to sculpt Cai Lun as he imagined him. The idea of creating a statue of Cai Lun came to Wang Yan quite by chance when he was surfing the internet.
Because 要参加一个展览，我设计了几个方案，有一个方案就是对世界的进程影响比较大的人，我想查一下这些人的资料。然后网页直接就跳出来影响世界的前100人嘛。然后我查，我一看，我说蔡伦怎么排这么靠前呢？
The beginning of human civilization is generally dated back to the invention of writing 5,000 years ago. In 1978, the American scholar Michael H. Hart drew up a list of the 100 most influential people in world history. He wrote them in order of the sphere, degree, and duration of their influence. The first 6 on the list are Muhammad, Isaac Newton, Jesus Christ, Sakyamuni, Confucius, and St. Paul. 7th on the list is Cai Lun. People tend to think of paper as something rather mundane, not nearly as exciting, for example, as the computer and internet. Yet for thousands of years, paper played a vital role in the advance of human civilization. Before the invention of paper, a variety of materials were used for writing on. In China, the commonest was bamboo cut into slips. Bamboo slips are still produced today to be used as film props or sold as handicrafts. The techniques used in making them haven't changed for thousands of years. The process of making a slip begins with the green skin being scraped off. The bamboo stalks are then baked over a fire to prevent them from rotting. The slips were generally between 20 and 50 centimetres long. With holes drilled in them, the bamboo slips could be strung together with a piece of string to form a sort of book. "2,000 years ago, Han Dynasty civil officials always carried a knife in their belts and a brush pen in their hair. The knife and brush pen were, with bamboo slips, ink and the inkstone, called the writer's 5 treasures. The knife was used to scrape off writing so that a bamboo slip could be used again. Since the knife and brush pen were always used in conjunction, civil officials during the spring and autumn period had popularly been called pen and knife officials. In 1975, archaeologists working at a tomb in Yunmeng in Hubei province found 2 wooden slips. They were letters written by 2 soldiers to their elder brother. At over 2,000 years old, they are the earliest family letters ever found in China. The tomb's occupant went by the name of Zhong. The 2 letters were written by his younger brothers Jing and Heifu, who were serving in the army of the state of Qin, which was attacking the state of Chu. One letter reads, "Is our mother well? Heifu and Jing are both safe and well. We were separated the day before yesterday, but we found each other again today." The other letter reads, "We spent all the money we borrowed from Yuanbai. If you cannot send us money, we may starve to death. Urgent, urgent, urgent."
China is famous for 4 ancient inventions. Perhaps the most significant of them is paper. The man who invented paper, Cai Lun, is counted among the most influential people of all time. But what did the Chinese write on before Cai Lun's great invention? And where did he get his inspiration? Please stay tuned for the first part of a brand new series, The Story of Paper.
Letters written on wooden slips would be attached to a wooden board. The board would bear the recipient's name and address and a clay seal. However, the wooden slips were too small for much to be written on them. Also, they were awkward to carry and deliver. All in all, they were highly inconvenient for letter writing, and as for having whole books written on them, well, that was virtually out of the question. The Han Dynasty scholar Sima Qian travelled far and wide collecting material for his monumental work, Records of the Grand Historian. Had he decided to commit everything he observed to memory and wait until he got home to write it on bamboo or wooden slips, he would have needed a prodigious mind as powerful as a computer. On the other hand, if he had recorded all his travel notes on bamboo or wooden slips, he would have needed many ox carts to carry them all home. Records of the Grand Historian comprises 250,000 characters. Written on bamboo slips, the work would have weighed over a ton. Bamboo slips were used for writing purposes in China for nearly 2,000 years. Had their use continued, what kind of civilization would we have today? In 2008, work was completed on the new China National Library. With a floor area of 80,000 square meters and more than 25 million books, it is the third largest library in the world. If all the books in it were written on bamboo slips, however, the building would have to be 630 kilometers high to accommodate them all. The town of Heshui lies at the foot of Mount Panjing in Guizhou province. Here the locals say they make paper in the same way that Tai Luen did 2,000 years ago. There are people here with the surname Tai who claim to be his descendants. Abandoned stone troughs are a common sight in Heshui. The town once had several paper mills, and the troughs were used in the paper-making process. The first paper was made here in the 14th century, around the end of the Yuan and beginning of the Ming dynasty. In the industry's heyday, several hundred households lived off paper-making. The paper they made was sold in Sichuan, Hunan and Guangdong provinces, and even in Southeast Asia. A local tradition has been preserved in Heshui for the past few hundred years. It's that paper makers all belong to a guild called the Association of Tai Luen Ancient Papermaking Techniques, or the Tai Luen Association for short. Tai Wenju is the current president of the Tai Luen Association. Tai Wenju started to learn about papermaking from his father as soon as he left school at the age of 16, and he's earned his living by making paper ever since. As a little boy, Tai Wenju was taught that it was his ancestors who had brought Tai Luen's papermaking techniques to Heshui.
许多在这个地方的才子呢，自己认为是他们是才人的后裔，他们的血谱有记载，说他们是从北方迁来的，在他们的香火上都是有才人先师之位。
The reverence for Tai Luen extends to other families, but only those with the surname Tai are entitled to write our ancestor above the words respected Master Tai Luen.
我们是他的子孙，我们又是继承他这个手艺，用他这个手艺来养活我们这些家人的这个养家糊口，我们是靠他这个手艺吃饭。
Paper is one of the 4 great Chinese inventions. But what led Tai Luen to invent paper? And where did he get the idea? Such questions are of little concern to the simple townsfolk who live by making paper today. Wang Yan tried time and time again to conceive of how he would sculpt Tai Luen, and eventually he pictured in his mind the contours of his face. He decided to depict Tai Luen as an old man. However, the only mention he could find of Tai Luen in historical references was a brief 281-character note in the history of later Han. It described Tai Luen as a eunuch at the Eastern Han court who was granted the title of Marquis of Longting. He was well educated and a conscientious worker, but eventually he fell out of imperial favor. Wang Yan is a native of Yongzhou and Hunan province. The town is just 120 kilometers away from Guiyang, now called Leiyang, which was where Cai Lun was born. Being a near neighbor of his subject was a considerable help to Wang Yan in imagining Cai Lun's physical appearance and temperament.
我们那代的人类鼻子基本上都是鼻梁比较扁，然后鼻头比较大，两个鼻翼比较大。我觉得那边的人基本上都是这样的鼻子，我的鼻子不像啊，我不太像我们那本地那边的人。他肯定还是比较干瘦的那种一个老头的那种形象，应该是一个实干家的那种感觉。他肯定是很有毅力的一个人，而且是很有理想的一个人，精力上应该还是比较充沛的。研究造纸术这一方面，他肯定需要大量的去采集材料，去做实验。
China is famous for 4 ancient inventions. Perhaps the most significant of them is paper. The man who invented paper, Cai Lun, is counted among the most influential people of all time. But what did the Chinese write on before Cai Lun's great invention? And where did he get his inspiration? Please stay tuned for the first part of a brand new series, The Story of Paper.
The Han Dynasty was a period of great cultural enlightenment lasting for more than 400 years. It provided the ideal environment for the invention of paper. Liu Bang was the founding emperor of the Han Dynasty. In a poem he wrote, "The wind sprang up and the clouds began to fly. I returned to my home after gaining power. I wish to enlist brave men to defend my land." But Liu Bang's successors realized that they needed more than just brave men to defend the country. In handling the affairs of government, civil servants would also be vital. Under the benign policies introduced in the early years of the Han Dynasty, the population grew rapidly. However, for the administration, this made the work of tax collection and household registration heavier and more complex, and it significantly increased the amount of written records they had to keep.
那个东方朔给汉武帝提个建议，就是他挑着竹简，挑到了朝廷上去，所以就很不方便。要是用绢帛来书写呢，又太贵，所以呢，兼贵而简重，就已经成了个大家都认识的问题了。
At the time of the Western Han Dynasty, the highest institute of learning in the country was the Imperial Academy, located in the capital Chang'an. There, students were taught the Confucian classics, and after graduating, they were appointed to official posts. The Imperial Academy moved to Luoyang after the Eastern Han Dynasty replaced Western Han early in the 1st century. At its height, it had 30,000 students, making it the largest institute of learning in the world at that time. But teaching so many students required vast quantities of books. Clearly, bamboo slips were not the answer. The problematic situation at the academy inspired Cai Lun to try to come up with a new, more convenient writing material. Early inventors tended to get their inspiration from existing technology. The China Silk Museum is located near West Lake in the city of Hangzhou. Among its collection are several ancient looms. Silk is woven by shuttling weft threads through warp threads attached to a loom. Silk weaving was developed in China long before paper was invented. Experts have suggested that Cai Lun may have got his inspiration for making paper from silk weaving. China, in fact, has a long tradition of using silk to write on. Tai Luan's idea was to produce a writing material that was as light and absorbent as silk, but not as time-consuming to make. He also realized that silk was far too expensive to use for writing purposes. A single piece of silk 10 meters long and 1 meter wide costs the equivalent of 360 kilograms of rice. And so Tai Luan began his search for a cheaper raw material and a more efficient production method that didn't require weaving. This is a sheet of imitation antique hemp paper. When it is magnified 200 times, numerous broken fibers are revealed. The interweaving is messy, quite unlike the neat arrangement of the warp and weft fibers in woven fabrics. Replicating this more orderly arrangement was the key to the invention of paper. But it was also the biggest challenge that faced Tai Luan 2,000 years ago. The most difficult technique to master in traditional papermaking is generally considered to be the screening. Screening involves placing a screen into the paper pulp. When a thin layer of pulp is floating evenly over it, the screen is carefully raised. On it are tiny pieces of fibre that are stuck together to form a kind of fabric. This is the sheet of paper. Xu Shen was the 2nd century philologist who wrote the celebrated dictionary Shuo Wen Jie Zi. In it, he described the character ju, meaning paper, as being similar to cotton cloth. It was also similar to another character indicating dregs of silk. As part of the silk-making process, the cocoons are boiled so that they break up, making it easier to reel the silk from them. But only the longer filaments are extracted. The broken and shorter ones are left in the pot, along with the dissolved remnants of the cocoons.
丝跟丝本身不能接在一起的，但是有丝胶的时候啊，它就可以互相粘在一起了。
The silk dregs coagulate at the bottom of the pot. It's possible that dregs like these might have inspired Tai Luan to invent paper. Tai Luan's idea was that short segments of fibre, if they were mixed together in water, would stick together to form a kind of fabric. Obviously, though, he had to find a cheaper alternative raw material to silk. It's early spring, and in Hershui, work has begun to prepare the materials for paper making. The chosen raw material is first steamed and boiled, then rinsed and soaked in water. After that, it is trampled on the ground and pounded with a pestle. This extracts the fibre, which is then cut into pieces and mixed to make a pulp. At the time of the Han Dynasty, there was no cotton grown in China. Rich people wore silk clothing, and the common people linen. Initially, Tai Luan used discarded linen cloth and fishing nets as his raw material. But the results were unsatisfactory, and so, instead, he tried tree bark. In Hershui, after the trees have produced new branches, the old ones are cut off and the bark is removed from them for making paper. The region is covered with mulberry trees. The history of making paper from mulberry bark can be traced all the way back to Tai Luan.
The man who invented paper, Tai Luan, is still widely revered. Not so in his lifetime, however. It would take hundreds of years before his great invention was widely embraced. What do modern experts think caused this reluctance to use paper? Would analysis of the composition of an ancient fragment reveal the answer? Find out in the second episode of The Story of Paper.